This is the Elder Scrolls Chapter 2, Daggerfall, and this is Daggerfall Unity. Daggerfall Unity is an ambitious project aiming to recreate the classic RPG in a new engine with plenty of performance and quality of life improvements, bug fixes, and open source modding support, all without losing the charm and atmosphere of the original. At the time of writing, it's currently considered an alpha, but it's actually much farther along than that makes it sound. Why are they being so conservative with the version numbers, you ask? Well, it comes down to the sheer scale of the project and what it aims to achieve. The entirety of Daggerfall is already playable from start to finish, with all of its original content and then some, and plenty of bug fixes and additions to questing, balance, and mod support, but the reason they consider it an alpha is because simply porting Daggerfall to a new engine isn't the goal. They want to create something bigger, Daggerfall Plus, basically. It makes sense to have such an ambitious scope if you think about it, because it's not like they're trying to preserve a hard-to-find, almost impossible-to-run game in an archival sort of sense. Daggerfall is still playable on modern machines with DOSBox, and it's open source, so it's available for free. The goal of this project isn't just to make a one-to-one replica of a game that you can already play, just in a different engine. It also fits with the spirit of the game, given that Daggerfall was one of the most ambitious RPGs of its time, so a project wanting to revive it and add to it in so many ways matches that. So what is the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall actually like as a game? It's a classic first-person RPG released in 1996, full of dungeons and loot, and is, in my opinion, where the Elder Scrolls series first started to get its unique flair and atmosphere that it's known for today. What with the Daedra and Atronach and everything that comes along with the setting now. It has some interesting differences from the modern games though, so let's start there. What's different? The first differences you see are in creating your character. You can choose classes directly, as in later games, or you can choose to answer questions to generate a character's class and stats. That's right, the GOAT from Fallout 3 was actually based on something else from Bethesda's past. You'll also notice two races are absent from character creation. The Orcs, which are still in the game but were only considered enemies, and wouldn't become playable until Morrowind, and the Imperials, which weren't considered a separate race until the spin-off third-person game The Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard, which released in 1998. From there, you'll be put into the starter dungeon for a quick tutorial, and finally into the open world of the game, which was one of its major selling points and also its most ambitious aspect. The world of this game is massive, like seriously huge. The game world centers around the Iliac Bay region of Tamriel and contains the province of High Rock, as well as the northern part of the province of Hammerfell on the south of the map, including the Alakir Desert. The sheer size of the open world is difficult to fathom, but remains even to this day as one of the largest ever created. To put it into gameplay terms, you'll see the map pop up in the background with each of its regions you can visit outlined in yellow borders. Even the smaller of these regions individually is bigger than the entire world map of Skyrim, and there are 44 regions to visit. In square kilometers, this world is bigger than Great Britain. Mechanically, the game stands between two worlds, that of the older CRPG and Dungeons & Dragons influenced games like the first Elder Scrolls Arena, and the series that inspired it, Ultima Underworld, and a newer world of first-person dungeon crawlers and open-world RPGs with more of the modern amenities we would recognize now, and more familiar control schemes using the keyboard and mouse together in the same way we think of today. It really laid the groundwork for what the series would become with Morrowind and beyond, and because of all this, it still plays pretty well despite some inconveniences. You're really thrown into a pretty huge situation, and it makes you feel like you aren't exactly a chosen hero so much as a cog in an enormous machine going on around you just trying to do your part. Daggerfall has a pretty unique atmosphere because of this, and Unity manages to preserve that while shoring up some of the less wonderful elements. Daggerfall was, we'll say lovingly, termed Buggerfall after its release because of the huge number of bugs, messed up quests, and broken mechanics it shipped with. These by no means make it unplayable, but it's certainly nice to have it work as intended after all these years. Some examples of things that Unity fixes are huge numbers of quest bugs, the fact that evasion didn't actually work as intended and caused you to miss more at higher levels for some reason, and race and class traits being applied properly when you make a new character, to name just a tiny few of the vast myriad fixes the game has gone through. This brings us to one of the biggest changes in my book that the Unity version has done to make it more playable. The interface. Personally, I think user interface design is one of the biggest unsung advancements in gaming. It's generally the kind of thing that you only notice if something goes wrong. A well-made interface won't draw attention to itself because it'll just be nice to use, but a poorly made or archaic one can really hamper your enjoyment of something. Old interfaces were made for older control schemes and much smaller resolutions, and they tend to be one of the biggest barriers to playing old games. People can deal with eccentric design and older mechanics, but an archaic interface can take you right out of enjoying the experience. Daggerfall Unity has done a lot to make sure this isn't a problem, while still retaining much of the classic Daggerfall's interface elements. Mouse control is the default now, rather than switching between mouse look and pointer modes. The inventory has more rows, and the screen is cleared up of all the buttons, like a more modern interface using hotkeys for menus. There are even options for changing the dialogue window to a more modern interpretation if you want. Not to mention it runs at modern resolutions and a stable frame rate rather than being stuck at 640 by 480. Once you start to get to grips with the game, you'll find some really neat ideas, and oftentimes these are things that future installments in the series simplified or did away with entirely. So it's a worthwhile experience just to go back and see their origins and what it was like in general, warts and all. Unity definitely smooths over those warts, but not to such an extent that the game loses its personality, because let's be real here, you don't go back to play old school RPGs for convenience. You expect some jank, some odd and occasionally frustrating mechanics, because it's all part of the package you deliberately went back to experience. I think it's pretty impressive to see the fans able to create something that fixes what needed fixing without removing things that help to create the game's personality, modern amenities without simplification. It's not an easy thing to do, knowing what to change and what to keep. How about some examples of some of those interesting ideas I was talking about that it's worth going back to experience? Reputations are handled in a pretty complex way, and each faction having different NPCs and branches holding different amounts of sway, and they all affect how you're seen. From the Mages Guild to the Dark Brotherhood, all of the guilds and factions an Elder Scrolls player would expect are here and joinable, but you also have temples for each of the 8 divines, as well as knightly orders for the divines that can be joined. The in-game world also encompasses several kingdoms with different nobles, kings, and queens to find, quest for, and or make very angry, adding to that sense of grand adventure in a living world. Enchanting works in a really neat way. Everything can be enchanted, even things like gemstones, and different things of differing materials have varying capacity for enchantment. Various things take different amounts of points, and you can actually add disadvantages to expand the points available. For instance, you could have a pair of gauntlets that can cast a very powerful spell that hurts you every time you use them. Soul gems aren't required for enchanting and instead act as a way to expand the points available. Some of them also have advantages and disadvantages they provide to the item along with the enchantments you choose. A Lich Soul, as an example, adds 1,000 points of capacity to an item and also causes it to fortify your destruction skill when worn, but also causes the item to lose durability in sunlight and deal less damage against undead enemies. Ideally, you would use a Lich Soul on something that isn't a weapon to avoid that last one. Filled soul gems are also some of the most expensive holdable items in the game. A soul gem containing a dragonling soul, for instance, is worth a bit over 500,000 gold, making soul trapping a lucrative skill to master. I actually prefer this version of enchanting to future versions because I love the flexibility and variety it allows, and I've always been a fan of adding weaknesses to things in order to make them super strong in specific scenarios instead. Vampirism is more complex than in future games as well. It comes with huge advantages but significant drawbacks. Large boosts to many skills, some new spells, and immunity to diseases, poisons, and paralysis, but sunlight hurts a lot, and fast travel takes twice as long since you can only travel safely at night. Different areas of the world also have different vampire clans, and they all relate to each other politically, so depending on where you get turned, you may find yourself an enemy of certain clans in different parts of the world and allies with others. Different clans also have additional spells and passives they give, so the nature of your powers can change depending on where you were turned. These services provided around the world are pretty varied as well. Entering a shop shows a message telling you the general wealth and quality of the shop, with lower quality shops having more basic goods but giving you more gold for what you sell them, and higher quality shops having some of the best of what you can get for your level. Different guilds and temples all provide various benefits depending on your rank with them, from potion making, enchanting, magic item identification, and training and skills to much more potent bonuses like teleportation, which is very valuable considering the size of the world, and even Daedra summoning, where on the correct day you can call up Daedric princes to do a quest for them in exchange for their signature artifact. There are, of course, some more archaic elements as well that you'll need to come to terms with while playing. The multiple interaction modes take a second to get used to because we're used to a contextual use button these days. You have the standard grab mode, which will interact with most things, speak to people, open doors, examine loot piles, etc. You also have a steal mode to switch to for picking locks, pockets, and other sneaky things, and an info mode that gives you information on whatever you click on, like the names of NPCs and enemies, telling you what a certain building is in town and what their hours are if they're closed. You have multiple cursor modes in the inventory as well, with an info mode, an equip mode that does exactly what it sounds like, a use mode for magic items, books, and the like, and a remove mode to drop things or transfer them between inventories. One quality of life improvement Unity makes is automatically switching to remove mode while examining loot piles and chests, so you'll always be in the right mode to pick stuff up instead of trying to put it on, like, straight from the ground. The combat, though, is probably the most dated feeling aspect of the game, even in Daggerfall Unity. Just like Arena before it and Morrowind after it, whether or not you physically connect with your weapon doesn't matter so much because it's all based on dice rolls. Once you level up a few times and get higher stats, it becomes less finicky feeling, but it'll always be stats-based under-the-hood combat, which, compared to how the series does it now, will always feel a bit archaic. The way classic Daggerfall handles its combat doesn't help. You actually have to hold right-click and move your mouse around to swing your weapon, which just adds another layer of separation between the combat and the player that it doesn't need considering its stats-based nature. This is another small improvement made by Unity. There's actually an option in the launcher to change it to simply having to click the right mouse button instead of wiggling all around, and I would personally highly recommend that option because, well, it's an Elder Scrolls game, so there's lots of combat, and this helps it feel a bit more responsive and less tedious, in my opinion. Aside from the large number of quest fixes, there have been plenty of other improvements this version has made so far. Enemies of different factions and groups will actually fight each other now, so you may enter a dungeon to find a battle between bandits and zombies already in progress. Lockpicking has a more sensible formula for success, and certain equipment exploits and enchanting bugs have been fixed. Pacifying enemies with language skills now works properly. Magic immunity is no longer tied to things like poison and paralysis, giving you more resistances and immunities that work separately. You can actually see how much gold you have in the various banks across the world instead of needing to write down a ledger yourself if you don't want to. There are tons more fixes too, like certain passives and skills like athleticism, personality, and adrenaline rush having a more obvious benefit, resistances and weaknesses having more detailed stages for variety, and enemy behavior and pathfinding just being improved across the board. If you want some of my personal tips to get started that I've learned so far, I have a few. Get the Mark and Recall spell or an enchanted item with Recall because good holy lord the dungeons can be huge and sometimes confusing, so dropping a mark as soon as you enter to teleport back to later can be a lifesaver. Carry an extra weapon. They can degrade pretty quick, and considering the size of dungeons, and some enemies can only be harmed by certain materials like silver are better for many undead or mithril are better for most Daedra. Rest frequently to get the skill ups you've earned so far and to make room for more, and train as often as you can with a faction trainer to help advance your main skills faster. Also, get a cart as early as you can. Carts carry loot for you, and you can't carry a huge amount yourself. A cart can actually carry about 7 times more than you can alone. There's even a feature where you can click the exit of a dungeon and access your cart from inside instead of leaving to drop your loot off and then continue exploring. Extra useful since dungeons reset immediately once you leave. There are great ways to ensure you always have space for more shiny things. Also, gold has weight, so putting it in banks and getting letters of credit can be the only way to buy some expensive things that actually cost more gold than you can even carry at once. The last important point here is modding. What you're seeing in the background includes several mods running. The airship and interior decorating stuff is all modded in, as are the lovely textures and models you're seeing. Dream is the name of the big visual enhancement mod, and it's seriously impressive stuff. They've redone everything to look quite nice while still keeping the vanilla feel, and even gone so far as to re-sprite everything, including doing 16,000 sprites for the paper doll in your inventory. Seriously. When I said this project has some serious ambition and passion behind it, I wasn't kidding. Modding this version of the game is easier and more flexible because it's in Unity. It uses C# and it's also open source, so the number of things mods can do is heavily expanded compared to the classic, and there's already some super cool stuff out there to look into. Modding has always been a really important facet of gaming for me. When I look back at some of the most fun I've had in games, it's often with modding stuff, so seeing such an effort on that front in this project warms my little black heart. At a glance, that's Daggerfall Unity. There's so much to explore and experience here, and the fact that it's all free should make it mighty tempting for any RPG fan to check out. It's most definitely worth going back and playing Daggerfall for its unique ideas, atmosphere, and ambition, and a project like this makes it more enjoyable and accessible than ever to actually go and do that. It's very easy to get it started. You just need an install of classic Daggerfall, and then you just have to point the Unity installer to it, and off you go. Modding it is super easy too because the file structure for installing new things is very direct and simple. I'll have several links below to help you get started, including the main Daggerfall Unity page, the Nexus page for the Dream mod so you can check out the screenshots and info on that, the recommended place to download the classic installer package, and the main UESP page to give you some more resources to look into for info on what's changed and some tips for new players. Daggerfall Unity is just an awesome project from some clearly passionate people, and the whole thing is just so cozy and nice that I want to send all the support I'm capable of their way. I think the games industry could use a lot more projects like this, fans of a series reviving older entries and improving upon them in ways only they can, showing the original devs what they loved and what they want, and who knows, maybe some of these ideas could affect future titles. If more devs and publishers could relinquish the source code for their older beloved titles to enable more projects like this, I think we'd have a more vibrant industry in general, and far-fetched or not, I think that's something worth trying for. Thanks very much for watching, and enjoy your adventures in the Iliac Bay.